All right, welcome to today's Coffee and Compliance. Thanks all for joining us this morning. I know it's getting close on the East Coast for some of you to lunchtime, but appreciate the West Coast folks jumping in the morning. Today, really excited to have Christine and Christy of Trinity Consultants. We partner with Trinity Consultants on a bunch of environmental applications for our customers. As a software company, we're always looking to partner with really great domain experts. So really happy to partner with Trinity on a lot of projects for our customers. I think it's a nice balance to our software platform around site compliance. But today we're talking about ESG and sustainability, so moving a little bit beyond compliance into the sustainability realm. But thank you for being here, Christine and Christy.
Thanks for having us.
I'll flip it over to you if you want to each give a quick intro.
Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, I'll go first. Christy Wilson, I am with Trinity's Pittsburgh office. I'm a principal here. Been with Trinity for going on 15, 16 years now. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years in industry. So living the day-to-day compliance world and managing multimedia compliance programs for industrial facilities. And then became a client and then an employee at Trinity. So I've been in the consulting realm now for more than half my career. Largely focused on air quality, but most recently really helping Trinity build our sustainability business practice and aligning that with the sort of the legacy air quality compliance technical support that we've been giving our clients for, going on half a century now. So we've been in this business a long time, and really our objective is to kind of leverage our deep knowledge of our clients' industrial practices, their emission sources, and help them build a strategy around sustainability and how they're going to run their businesses in a sustainable fashion going forward as we move possibly from a sort of a voluntary market into a compulsory compliance market. So we all know what compliance feels like in other aspects of EHS. So this feels like a great fit for us and where we have expertise. So that's really my role currently. I do a large amount of my work is focused on some energy intensive sectors like iron and steel and oil and gas. And so it's sort of a natural progression for me to move into the ESG realm for those sectors specifically. And so that's kind of the role I'm playing now. We have a relatively new business unit or business line focused on ESG services. So I'm part of that community of practice, really supporting our East region of the company. And that's been my role and working with Christine. So I'll just pass it over to her.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. And Ryan, thank you so much for inviting us here today. I'm very excited to talk all things related to ESG. So looking forward to the discussion today. And I didn't bring my coffee, I already drank it, so I'm limiting myself right now to water. But once again, Christine Hammond, Trinity Consultants. I've been with Trinity for just over 11 years. Started in our Baton Rouge, Louisiana office, so the good old French, if you know some French, the red stick, right? Started here back in 2011, focused on air quality, so dispersion modeling, reporting, compliance, permitting, all the way Title V type NSR permitting, but also very early on in my career, I got kind of a taste for sustainability. So helping clients with CDP reporting and disclosure as well. Over the years, I've also kind of transitioned into a subject matter expert in all things related to refrigerants. Of course, kind of starting with Part 82 EPA compliance. But what's interesting about refrigerants, of course, a lot of them have high global warming potentials. So naturally, as we saw the EPA release a rule last year for the phase down of specifically HFC refrigerants, because of the high global warming potential, they are included for client scope 1 GHG emissions for a lot of our industrial sectors that we service. For example, pharmaceutical clients. The refrigerants can be a large piece of that kind of sustainability, that scope 1 emissions pie. So naturally kind of working with clients, Christy already mentioned different climate strategy, right? How can we help clients on their decarbonization journey? So that naturally kind of led into that Part 82 core EPA experience into kind of helping clients in that perspective. And of course, other decarbonization strategies as well. So I was with the core environmental consulting office here in Baton Rouge, and just effective in January this year, I actually transitioned over to, as Christy mentioned, the EPRM business line, specifically my new title being Sustainability and ESG Manager. So helping clients in all things related to ESG. Of course, today I think the discussion will kind of talk more about the environmental pillar of ESG. Of course, to a lot of our clients, Christy already mentioned, energy intensive, a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So really kind of focusing in for clients on their climate strategy. Of course, emission quantification, scope 1, scope 2 emissions. A lot of clients, maybe later we'll kind of talk about 2022 themes that we're seeing for ESG. Of course, scope 3 categories, determining what's material for clients and helping them quantify, essentially so we can cast the net out and really help establish targets for our clients, which Christy's also been involved in a lot. So as a brief introduction, I think that was a little more than you asked for, but once again, thank you for inviting us. We're very excited for the discussion today.
Cool. No, super happy to have you both here. I mean, as you're seeing with your own business practice, opening up new business units, there's so much focus on this. And as we'll get into it today, not only at like the public sector, and like we were chatting about before we started around SEC ruling, but just even that the trickle down effect to private companies and the full supply chain. Really, it's not just a public company thing, and I think that's maybe one of the takeaways from today is it's not just a handful of companies that need to worry about this. I guess to kick things off, can you give a quick kind of state of the industry regarding ESG and specifically sustainability reporting requirements?
Yeah, sure. So I think up to this point, what we have seen is that the driver has been largely voluntary-based reporting programs or platforms with really mostly investor and stakeholder-driven initiatives. And so many companies have been doing some form of corporate sustainability reporting for a decade or more. But what we've seen in the last probably 18 to 24 months is really a huge uptick in the interest in doing a more rigorous, more comprehensive look at ESG and sustainability strategy. And it's really expanded beyond, as you kind of alluded to, beyond the publicly traded companies and including some private companies as well. So currently everything is basically a voluntary reporting structure with the exception of greenhouse gas emissions that are a portion of your scope 1 footprint that you report to EPA under the mandatory reporting rule 40 CFR Part 98 for those companies that trigger that reporting threshold. So that's not inclusive of everyone. So it's only those facilities with actual GHG emissions greater than 25,000 metric tons per year of CO2 equivalent. So certainly doesn't capture everyone. That's a small subset of industry sectors across the country. So we have those folks who've been doing that reporting for about a decade. And EPA was pretty transparent initially when rolling out that rule that the idea was to collect data to inform future rulemaking. We started to see the ball rolling a little bit there under the Obama administration. Of course, that sort of took a pause in the last few years. There is definitely some thought that that data that's been collected for more than a decade now will form the basis for some type of rulemaking, potentially under the legacy Clean Air Act structure, although we're not quite sure what that looks like yet, right? So that's a potential. Then we also have the potential for some type of more formalized cap and trade or carbon tax program. We're starting to see more and more state activity on that front because the feds have stalled a little bit there. So, California obviously has their own program. We're starting to see more states on the West Coast looking at that. And I think we'll continue to see some evolution there with a more formalized regulatory framework. And then, of course, you mentioned the SEC activities. So where the world of environmental and finance may converge here in the near future, which will be a very awkward place for many of us to live. who've been doing pure environmental work for so many years. So I think we'll kind of see where that goes. And I'm sure Christine has some thoughts. She's been following the SEC stuff pretty closely, so she may have a little bit more insight there than I do. But it's definitely a rapidly changing landscape. We are seeing virtually every single one of our clients in every sector thinking about ESG, talking about sustainability, looking at quantifying their carbon footprint when that was not really something that had been looked at until recently.
Yeah, and I think, Christy, that's a good point. I mean, kind of looking at the current state, right? And you talked a little bit about fragmentation. Also, all of this is voluntary, right? So I think there's a lot of asymmetries right now and kind of uncertainty in reporting and what's required and how can we get kind of that apples to apples comparison, right, for different companies. Also, we have investors are calling for kind of simplifying because of all that. Investors really want a simplification of the corporate reporting landscape. And really over the past year or so, you mentioned we've seen a lot of different changes in the past 18 to 24 months. If we look back kind of in the last year, I know probably Christy would agree and Ryan that really my inbox has been flooded. There's so many things. If you're not keeping up to date kind of on a weekly basis, I feel like I get behind. If I take a beach to the trip with the family, it's like, okay, what did I miss? Did the SEC finally, release that draft rule? So in fact, this morning, as an example, if we just look at the different standards and frameworks, 2:30 a.m. Central Time this morning, my inbox got an email from the Global Reporting Initiative, so the GRI, and it was releasing its coal sector standard. And so this sector standard, if you're familiar with GRI, is just the coal is the second of 40 planned sector standards from the GRI. So once again, things are constantly changing, they're constantly evolving. If we go back even to summer 2021, the Value Reporting Foundation, so that's the VRF, it was actually created from the merger of the stay with me now, the IIRC, so the International Integrated Reporting Council, and also SASB. I'm sure most of us are probably familiar with SASB. Here at Trinity, we often utilize SASB. It has about 77 different industry-specific standards, and we often use them to determine ESG materiality for the different clients that we work with. And what's great about SASB too, it also provides key performance indicators or KPIs, and we use those to help develop those for our clients. So moving from kind of summer 2021 then into October, going back to GRI, of course, it launched kind of its revised universal standards. As I mentioned already, it's in the process of releasing up to 40 different sector standards. So certainly whenever we're doing materiality assessments for clients, we're always referring to SASB, always referring to GRI to make sure we have the latest and greatest. Then of course, if you're an ESG nerd like me, back in 2021 at the Conference of the Parties, so COP26, the IFRS Foundation launched what we call the ISSB. So that's the International Sustainability Standards Board. And really the ISSB, the purpose of it is to develop that comprehensive global baseline of sustainability disclosures. So going back to that fragmentation, we have asymmetries. How can we establish kind of that global network to really meet the needs of investors, right? So essentially the goal of this, this new board is to meet the demands for transparent, also reliable and comparable reporting on ESG matters. With a focus, and we're going to see this a lot, we've seen it with the TCFD, a focus really on climate strategy and also risk management. So as Christy already mentioned, a lot of us environmental nerds, here we have an EPA, but now we're moving into the SEC and we're becoming more and more familiar with this strategy and risk management piece to help our clients really prepare. Now, hang with me now, I'm not done yet. The VRF and the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, so that's the CDSB, actually merged into the IFRS Foundation. And once again, it has this overall goal of consolidating resources to successfully launch the ISSB that was formed at COP26. Once again, I thought the EPA had a lot of acronyms, starting my career there with reporting and permitting, dispersion modeling. But now you add in and you look at the ESG, and it's once again continuously evolving. But hopefully, as Christy kind of kicked us off here, we hope that the ISSB and some of these global initiatives really helps simplify a lot of things, right? We want to create that level playing field and really create kind of the apples to apples comparison. So we'll have, you know, the ultimate goal of resources in one place, also reducing that fragmentation that Christy had mentioned, have strong regulatory backing. So that's very important. And also once they release these new kind of disclosures, is scaling up that global adoption as well. We really want to connect, as Christy mentioned, the sustainability disclosures and the financial disclosures. Really, a lot of this is investor driven, right? So once again, how can we provide that information so that investors have this and their questions can be answered? Once again, focusing not only on the risks, but also the opportunities to help stakeholders and investors make those informed decisions. After all of this, I threw out a lot of acronyms, kind of a lot of updates. Once again, ESG is just continuously evolving, right? So look for those updates. Today, and Christy may agree with this, I think most clients are probably choosing like a SASB, a GRI. We're seeing a lot of increase in TCFD. But really every organization should monitor kind of what's evolving, what's available. And really it's not kind of a one size, you know, a one fits all landscape, if you will. Depending on your industry, your organization, there may be different standards and frameworks that make more sense for you to utilize in your ESG kind of journey, if you will. So.
Yeah, a lot to unpack and move around and understand as it shifts in like 3 and 6 month increments. You mentioned, Christy, about like EPA had made some progress, really just the greenhouse gas. We're seeing a lot of investor pressure, but no formal rulemaking yet as of late from SEC. Where do you find a lot of the drivers around sustainability and ESG? Where do you see that? I mean, my impression has been it's largely been the financial sector, and that's because investors and the general public are pushing on it, whether it's a consumer products, just, you know, more sustainable goods. But is there any insights you can offer there of like, where are we seeing that pressure today, and where do you anticipate the pressure to be on companies down the road?
Yeah, so we're seeing it from a few places. The investor pressure is definitely there, both in terms of, you know, we have a new generation of investors who are very attuned to investing their money in something that's meaningful, that matters to them. Sustainability matters to this generation of investors. And so I think that's driving a lot of the interest at the investor level. We're also seeing a number of private equity firms who are heavily focused on ESG. There are ESG branded funds out there that are also looking at that. We've been working actually with some private equity firms ourselves, which is a bit of a new client base for us. We typically are just working with those industrial facilities. However, you know, there are a number of private equity firms, particularly those that are heavily leveraged in the energy intensive sectors, that are very interested in understanding, you know, what their sustainability risks and potentially opportunities are with those investments. Some of them are talking about developing their own sustainability indexes in order to evaluate those investments. So we've been working on a number of things with PE firms as well. Certainly we're seeing an impact in the supply chain as well. So a lot of customer driven requests, particularly for industries in the construction, building materials kind of sector, with the implementation now of the Buy Clean California program, which requires, you know, that all government funded building construction projects use sustainable resources. For that purpose, we're seeing a trickle down impact across the supply chain for that. Not just in California, but outside of California. Obviously, if you import products into California, you'll need to comply with that. Other states are adopting similar programs. The feds have talked about something, modeling something after this program. So we definitely think that there are customer driven, we're seeing, you know, a pretty strong customer driven impact there too.
Yeah, and what is that, you know, the trickle down impact of supply chain and the building materials, but do you see it in other private companies too, getting pressure to report out sustainability metrics or adopt certain reporting, or just even just taking it under consideration when making decisions?
And maybe I'll give another example too. So I have a private company, and it's a mining company, and so they don't have a formal sustainability or ESG program. And so this example may kind of parallel some that Christy gave, but they're receiving a lot of their product they supply to Europe. And so for a couple of years, they've been getting requests or inquiries from these customers asking about their CO2e per pound or ton of product that's produced, right? And so it kind of slowly started as this informal exercise, and just this year, now they're taking it up a notch, right? And they're asking for life cycle assessments. Do you have any LCAs, or do you have an environmental product declaration for this product that we're purchasing? Or actually, they're purchasing numerous products. And so they basically gave my client kind of 4 different options, all the way from an EPD to an LCA, and it kind of just trickled down, and if you don't have this, you can do this. If you don't have this, you can do this. And essentially, my client, they are reporting, as Christy already mentioned. She talked a little bit about Part 98, so they do have their data for that, but it's very limited. And it's not just one client or one customer that's now requesting this data. It's 3 or 4, right? And so with that, we've worked with this client, once again, not really from their investors, other stakeholders, it's from their who's purchasing their product. And so we're working with them to develop an ESG program, essentially kind of starting from scratch, do the materiality assessment, also help, they're going to report now the CDP, have historically been using EcoVadis as well, but how can we sharpen the pencil and really help them to incorporate or develop different policies, so environmental policies and other metrics within EcoVadis as well. So once again, not doing a formal LCA or EPD at this time, but certainly it may lead to that. And I know Christy has a lot of experience with LCAs and such, but once again, not just restricted to the US. If we look at Europe, UK, there's certainly a couple years ahead of us, and a lot of the demands for our private companies are from those customers as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think just in about a 4 or 5 month window, we had another client we were talking to about doing LCA work, and they basically said, we're not interested in doing EPDs at this time. It's really just we want to get an LCA started so that we're positioned to do an EPD later if we need to for each of our products, but we're content to just start the LCA effort. By the time we gave them a proposal and they cut us a PO, they had already changed their mind and said, we've gotten so many requests since the beginning of 2022, we just need to go ahead and go all the way through to the end goal of doing the EPD. So I think that it's a rapidly changing landscape right now.
Yeah, what would you recommend? Like, a company comes to you and says, we have nothing today. There's no formal investor pressure. There's no requirement, but we see this coming and we want to get a sustainability program in place. What are the kind of first 3 steps a company should take in developing that? You mentioned the materiality assessment, but what would you recommend to a company saying, hey, we want to improve our sustainability program. We think it's good for recruiting. We think it's good for capital, if we're taking on loans and we want to have a program in place, it's good for insurance purposes, all these things. What are the top 3 steps you all would recommend for a company? Because I think a lot of folks on this call and just wider audience, they may not have a formal pressure, but they may want to take that first step. So what's the easiest thing they can do to accomplish that?
Yeah, so this is a very common situation that I've encountered in the last 2 years with lots and lots of clients of companies of all sizes, by the way. So, there's a perception that maybe, only the Fortune 100 companies are worrying about this. That's definitely not the case. We're seeing everything from the small cap, mid cap on up to those, big Fortune 100 companies looking at this. So usually the first couple of things we recommend are, number 1, to really develop a carbon footprint. So you need to understand what your baseline is in order for you to know where you are and how where you may have opportunities and where you have risk, right? So the old adage about, you can't improve what you don't measure. So really understanding what your current footprint is critical. I think the other really critical step is benchmarking. And so we've done this for a number of clients where we sort of take the time to mine all of the data that's out there for peers and competitors in your sector. If you spend any time trying to look at what other companies have published for CSRs or ESG reports, you'll see that many of them are hundreds of pages long, and trying to mine the critical pieces of information or to really understand the basis for things that they've published can be challenging. So we do a lot of that work too. So we are able to spend the time to go through, distill out what's critical and important and meaningful, and summarize that for companies to look at, for their executive teams to look at, for their board of directors to look at, just to understand where they might stack up in their industry space relative to their peers. So those are the two main things I usually start with, baseline and benchmarking. From there, it's kind of the natural transition to looking at, do you want to set some type of target, an emission reduction goal, a net zero goal? What does that look like? Is it on an absolute basis? Is it on an intensity basis? Because there isn't a specific standard single framework that everyone's following, you have some wiggle room there. So we see lots of companies doing things very creatively in terms of setting their ESG goals. And they can be anything, right? So sometimes we'll see companies saying, well, we're going to reduce our NOx emissions, or we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to substitute, this refrigerant over the next 2-3 years. And so that the initiatives that different companies are employing is very much all over the map, depends very much on their specific situation and circumstances. And so we do that kind of work too, where we sort of form working groups with our clients with a cross section of their in-house experts to go through all of the places where they have emissions impact and help them figure out where they should be spending their time, resources, money, and really sort of do an internal assessment of where they get the most cost-effective approach to reducing emissions or reducing their impact scores. So I think, if we had to narrow it to the first three, those are the first three I usually see: getting your footprint figured out, benchmarking against your peers, and then setting some kind of targets.
And Christy, that's a great point. And just to kind of build off of that initial kind of materiality assessment and going into your competitor and peer benchmarking. So I think kind of just expanding on that, if we still are good on time on this question, Ryan. But really, so kind of diving into a little bit more of the materiality assessment. So we kind of mentioned before different standards and frameworks, and there's new mergers and new ones coming out, and it's hard to keep up. But what's interesting too, when we do this materiality assessment, sometimes we like to do what I call a preliminary assessment, right? So it's perhaps using the SASB industry specific standards. So SASB is very concerned with what's financially material to investors, right? So this kind of going into the idea of double materiality. So once again, SASB kind of looking at the investor driven, whereas GRI on the other hand is really kind of focused on materiality as looking at people, the environment, and also a little bit of the economy as well. So a lot of times clients, and we'll use kind of the GRI and SASB to kind of once again look at materiality and try to look at all aspects under ESG. And so that's kind of we can use other sector standards as well. Also, any inquiries, we've talked about that. If our clients are getting, for example, from Europe or different, Christy talked about the big Fortune 100, and we have this trickle down effect. If you're getting even private companies, these different customer supply chain, value chain inquiries, taking that into consideration as well when we build out this preliminary assessment. Then, of course, we like to work with the clients. What's important to your different business unit? What about management? What about operations? What about human resources? What about your employees as well? So we like to kind of present that preliminary materiality assessment to our clients and engage with them there. Also, kind of lastly, as part of this assessment, of course, we want to engage, stakeholders. So engaging directly via, phone interviews, it could be workshops, it could be surveys, your different customers, your employees, and other stakeholders. So once again, we can really cast the net out to all stakeholders to determine what's material, right? Because going back to the SEC, it's what does the kind of average investor think is material to your company. And so once again, we can kind of take all of this information and build out in kind of a simple form. If you picture a figure, and if you've looked at ESG reports for different companies, you can kind of picture a figure in your mind of, what's important to your different stakeholders, and then what's the impact on your given organization. And so based on all of these, all the way from, E, S, and G, these different relevant topics, from there, you can kind of plot them and see what's the most material, has the highest materiality to your company. And once again, a lot of companies from here, we can start to establish different key performance indicators. We want to track the data, right? Some things clients are already doing, they're already tracking and they have that information. But as Christy mentioned, we potentially want to identify different gaps, establish the baseline specific to greenhouse gas emissions, other environmental metrics as well, even health and safety, right? And then from there, be able to set targets. And most importantly, we want to be able to measure it. And we may talk about this later, but real-time tracking is very important. And I think that's one of the themes for 2022. No longer in my days of CDP, when I first started in 2012, my first CDP, you collect the data in February, one time.
Yeah.
And really today, because of all the investor, the stakeholder pressure, if you're only looking at your data one time per year, I mean, Christy will tell you this, it's kind of too late. If you're not hitting your target your goal that you've established, a lot of those goals you're publicly announcing, right? So you really need to track those. We have CEOs of companies asking our contacts, hey, I need this information for a meeting tomorrow, right? We need to have that data available. So that's where we are right now, so.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good way to wrap up. I mean, it's great, we can look at benchmarks and KPIs, but if we're not tracking the data, like none of this matters if we have no idea what we're doing. So, right. I mean, obviously a topic on the software side that I'm very passionate about is like, but the data, we got to actually get the data, and then we can make all the decisions and analyze it and model it. So we're at the end of our time here. I really appreciate both of you coming on. We could talk for hours. I think we'll have to have another one, especially with the SEC meeting next week about this. But thank you very much, Christine and Christy, for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Great discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.